But first, let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr. He continues to inspire and guide us for a lot of very, very important and salient reasons. So one is that we all need to continue each year and each day to sort of correct the record about him. He was a radical. He was somebody fundamentally committed to human liberation, democracy, economic and racial justice, and anti-imperialism. He was extraordinarily courageous in his physical courage in his fight against American apartheid, against Jim Crow, and for civil rights. He was enormously morally courageous to earn the scorn of liberal and establishment America by opposing the LBJ genocidal war on Vietnam. This was his true legacy. And the other thing was that he actually had an incredible theological mind. And as you saw in that cold open, a really deep and profound understanding of dialectics and different dynamics, the relationship between power and love that is elemental to getting it right today, politically, economically, morally, and spiritually. He created unity within a struggle for justice, but never was apologized for or was conciliatory for injustice. Many who want to defang his legacy by excluding the truly radical nature of his politics. Let's get a little reminder of those radicalism when it comes to economic justice here.
We read one day, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But if a man doesn't have a job or an income, he has neither life nor liberty and the possibility for the pursuit of happiness. He merely exists.
He didn't separate these struggles. He preached a synthesis that made clear that justice doesn't just mean absence of harm, but a sharing of power, political and economic. He also understood to achieve the society, we need a radical and core shift of our values. In his address to the Riverside Church, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence in 1967, he wrote this. He said this, "I'm convinced that to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values. We must rapidly begin to shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, extreme materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered." This is a absolutely perfect diagnosis of Trump's America in 2020. And of course, where we've been for decades after the assassination of MLK and the FBI terror campaign against him and the entire civil rights movement. But this should make us think. First, about his full radical legacy and how we realize and achieve it today, and who's carrying it on today in modern politics globally. Secondly, we need to look at the spiritual and philosophical message, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian or an atheist or anything else. Understanding those dynamics and understanding those ideas is fundamental to that value shift so that we don't replicate all of those poisonous patterns embodied in capitalism inside our own movements and dynamics. This is another deep insight he had. And it's also in embracing him fully as a person, not some sort of airbrushed saint figure, a flawed, struggling, and incredibly courageous human being. With racism on the rise, U.S. militarism engaging endlessly overseas, there's no doubt that this revolution in values is deeply needed. And we also face a fundamental attack on our humanity from Silicon Valley, where they hope to turn us into algorithms, where the fusion of sort of micro customization and the complete elimination of, on one hand, this is what Evgeny Morozov has so brilliantly articulated. On one hand, a complete reduction to individual, isolated, atomized human experiences with a blind, reductionist, quote unquote, objective metrics that eliminate historical, social, political, economic, and moral understandings. So on one hand, micro delivered experience just for you, outside of community, outside of context. And on the other hand, the quote unquote mass objective deployment of, as an example, things like facial recognition technology, which, as we all know, will be an enormous threat and an increasing of racism and the abuses of the criminal justice system, as well as an overall threat to already totally depleted privacy and civil liberties. We must break out of this isolation and the exhausted, destructive neoliberal capitalist ideology behind it. The hopelessness of capitalist realism that no real change is possible and that decision-making should be concentrated in the hands of the wealthy elite is a cultural idea that is pumped out by Silicon Valley and other prime predatory industries. We must do better and present a vision that strives to balance and synthesize love and power, that knows how to build up while never compromising on the question of justice. There's no role model for how to do it than the actual, true, and living revolutionary legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Do you guys want to add anything to that?
I just hit that, I've had the opportunity to go back, as, I hope that many people were able to do, and watch some of MLK's speeches. And I think that he was really able to hit that synthesis when he talked about racism and capitalism. He had the speech is escaping me right now, but he had this great speech talking about how there was no proper after slavery there was not this the promise like 40 acres and a mule, and this failure to basically allow black people in this country to be able to stand up on their own 2 feet. Meanwhile, at the same time, the United States government was pushing its army through the West and literally giving away land to white settlers. Right. So this idea that like
in the wake of genociding,
of course, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But this idea, that the U.S. government doesn't help out people, doesn't help out like large sections of the population is completely false. And he's able to do that in a way that I think was very constructive, where he's able to highlight like, yes, there is economic justice and there is racial justice. And oftentimes, those two things are going to hit ahead without this kind of false consciousness that some people think there's like these are two separate issues, and then when they talk about racialized capitalism, they lose the kind of grand narrative of like the American capitalist system.
We've been this project of sort of mythologizing and historicizing MLK to sort of reveal the economic egalitarian side of him. We feel like we're winning that, don't we, over the last decade or so?
I think so.
I think it's definitely that conversation's changed a lot. I feel like even just in my conscious living memory of it.
I agree. Also, an incredible tactician. I mean, his understanding of media, his understanding that why they're all, they're wearing suits, they're, how things were presented and interpreted visually is another great and brilliant hard-headed tactic that we need to learn from him as well. You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.